here are weapons so terrible and devastating they had to be banned from war. Number 1. Nerve agents.
It was developed by the USSR during the Cold War, and it's one of the deadliest synthetic substances on Earth.
One of the most frightening weapons ever created, nerve agents are organic chemicals that disrupt the nervous system of its targets.
It's so toxic that a spoonful, with the right delivery mechanism, could kill thousands.
Being poisoned by these chemicals causes vomiting, blistering on the skin, and burning of the eyes, loss of bodily control, involuntary defecation, and urination, and untimely death.
It is now clear that Mr. Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia.
The poison can be transmitted as a gas or a liquid with symptoms appearing just seconds after exposure. What is even more scary is that the nerve agents are usually colorless and tasteless. Consuming even a small amount of one of these poisons will more or less guarantee an agonizing death.
Even the very small doses, very small, still they are very effective.
For obvious reasons, these chemical weapons have been banned by most countries, but many suggest that they are still used by assassins and other secret organizations around the world. Nerve agent killed a 44-year-old woman and hospitalized 4 more in a supposed assassination attempt in the UK in 2018.
Friends say Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgis were both frothing at the mouth and hallucinating before they fell unconscious in the English town of Amesbury on Saturday.
Number 2. Flamethrowers.
It's been deemed too metal for war. Using flamethrowers on the enemy is a big no-go today.
Heavy limitations have been placed on the use of flamethrowers in recent years due to the horrific nature of the deaths they inflict. They were, however, used heavily in the Second World War, where both sides used them to clear out trenches and buildings where enemy troops might be hiding.
And when he needed a flamethrower to clear out a cave or whatever, why, we were called and went up and did their job.
One of the most useful aspects of the flamethrower is the psychological effect it had on the enemy.
All we could do is fire and try and kill all the Japanese we could. We did a fair job, but not a good enough job, apparently, because there were an awful lot of civilians lost their lives.
Soldiers who were terrified of being burnt alive were not as effective in the battlefield. As technology has advanced, so has the effectiveness of these horrific weapons. Today, they have thankfully been banned by many governments.
Soldiers are prevented from using these in populated areas. That, combined with the increasing effectiveness of small arms technology, meant flamethrowers were no longer practical for modern war.
Number 3. Landmines.
Landmines are one of very many other important tools that our commanders need to have available to them on the battlefield to shape the battlefield and to protect our forces.
From their invention to this very day, landmines have been many soldiers' worst nightmare. Mines have been banned by international treaties due to the indiscriminate nature, often killing civilians, allies, and enemies alike.
The Biden administration has announced that it will restrict the use of anti-personnel landmines in military combat, reversing a Trump-era policy.
Most mines are never triggered during war. According to UNICEF, there are 110 million active mines out there in the world ready to be triggered.
They're not designed to be safe. They're designed for one purpose, and that is to kill.
One of the most infamous designs was the German-designed Bouncing Betty, a deadly anti-personnel mine that was used to devastating effect in World War II.
And what happens is, this thing is propelled upward. So this bounds up about waist level, and then it explodes. And these ball bearings that are all the way around come flying out.
The ball bearings were capable of ripping through flesh and metal, with some reports claiming that these mines could inflict casualties within 100 meters of detonation.
However, the White House says that the devices could still be used on the Korean Peninsula as they play an integral part of South Korea's defense.
Number 4. Cluster bombs.
We don't have countries such as the US, China and Russia that are major producers and have been users, US and Russia, of cluster munitions.
Cluster bombs are designed to expel a number of smaller bombs. This makes them unpredictable and hard to aim properly. It's not always obvious what will be destroyed. Recently, these bombs were banned for that exact reason.
Every state military has the obligation to use as precise weapons as possible to hit military targets and not civilian targets.
More concerns came from the fact that these smaller bombs often don't explode, being triggered by innocent civilians long after fighting was over. Governments such as the UK and the US were still using these bombs not too long ago. Thankfully, these two countries, along with 100 others, have today agreed to never use them again.
There's other weapons that do that don't produce thousands of duds that can affect civilians for a long time afterwards.
Number 5. Mustard gas.
It's heavier than air, so it lingers in the soil of battlefields for weeks or even months, still effective. It is extremely painful, and victims could take weeks to die.
Famously used in the trenches of the First World War, mustard gas was known to burn the skin and lungs to cause blindness and eventually kill its targets. If they didn't die, soldiers who were hit with mustard gas had to endure agonizing burns to the skin. If you inhaled the fumes, the gas would burn your lungs from the inside out.
Mustard gas, it reacts with human DNA right away, within seconds of making contact, and it causes irreversible damage.
Most countries have banned the use of this gas, and others as part of the Chemical Weapons Convention, severely limiting their use.
Frequently, you'll see things like chronic skin problems, including skin cancer, that never goes away.
Number 6. Spike pits.
The North Vietnamese devised many techniques that transformed the simple punji stick into a seriously debilitating and even fatal weapon.
Also known as punji sticks, these booby traps were used extensively against U.S. soldiers fighting in Vietnam. The pits were dug out and filled with extremely sharp spikes that would scratch or even impale their target. The holes were hidden with leaves and grass, and the spikes were often coated in poison or even human faces to increase the chances of infection.
If a soldier fell into the pit, they would be impaled on the stakes. It was a truly horrible trap, but was super effective.
Spikes were often pointed downwards, meaning that soldiers who fell into the traps would injure themselves even more when they tried to get out. The purpose of these traps was not necessarily to kill, but to maim them and therefore slow down an entire group of soldiers. Number 7. Biological weapons.
We do know that some civilians were exposed.
Many notions throughout history have deliberately spread disease among enemy populations to wipe them out.
The Kremlin claims without any evidence that the U.S. has helped Ukraine develop biological weapons in secret laboratories.
Sometimes called germ warfare, the most infamous example is the rumored deliberate spreading of smallpox among Native American populations by European settlers during colonization. More recently, during the Second World War, diseases such as anthrax and botulism were made into weapons during World War II by the British government.
Scientists exploded anthrax bombs near immobilized sheep to determine if the spores would survive an explosion and retain the ability to infect anyone nearby.
Germany, Japan, France, and the US also had biological warfare programs, all of which were eventually banned by international treaties.
We're seeing a huge expansion in the biodefense complex, and as a result of that, the risk of something like this happening again is much greater.
Whilst weaponizing disease is considered illegal by most nations, there's no telling what other organizations might one day use them if they get the chance. Thanks for watching this episode of History 101. Be sure to subscribe for more.